Hi, folks. Welcome to the American Pakistan Foundation's next podcast on history and culture. This is a space where we highlight and celebrate the amazing accomplishments and stories of Pakistanis in Pakistan and across the diaspora. Our episode for today is entitled Many Stories, One Pakistan. My name is Daniel Wakar, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of History at Tufts University. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Amneh Sheikh-Farooqui. Amneh is a social entrepreneur, cultural practitioner, and sustainability advocate working at the intersection of gender equality, decolonization, and cultural design. With over 2 decades of experience in Pakistan's impact and creative sectors, her work spans women's empowerment, cultural heritage, sustainable fashion, and climate resilience. Amna creates spaces for courageous conversations, participatory learning, and inclusive leadership in a plethora of ways. She does this as chair and curator of Women of the World festivals in Pakistan, founder and CEO of Polly and Other Stories, as well as chief strategy officer at the Blue Company. She's an Acumen, Miller Center, and International Visitor Leadership Program Fellow, and the author of Fearless, Profiling 50 Remarkable Pakistani Women. She has a master's in international relations from the University of Karachi and a master's in public policy from Australia National University. She is based in Karachi, Pakistan. Amna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Danielle. I'm really excited to be here.
Of course. So first off, could you tell us a bit about your identity, background, and connection to Pakistan? How did you become interested in women's empowerment, cultural heritage, and sustainable fashion?
You know, usually, and I think this is a very Pakistani response, right? When somebody asks you about your relationship to your country, you always make that traditional joke, which is it's complicated, and then you're supposed to laugh. And I'll admit that for a long time, that is pretty much how I would have responded. And because the truth is, all of our relationships with our country are very complicated. Uh, but lately, and especially over the last couple of years, I've been reflecting more on how deeply loving and how deeply rooted it is. I've thought a lot about how sometimes a single story can come to define an entire people, an entire country, and what happens when that country or that culture or that group of people is repetitively described in that one particular way. And over time, and I think this is the bit that I think really sort of scares me, is how much of that story that's told internationally or globally, we begin to internalize and believe about ourselves. So I've spent much of my career thinking about that, like who tells the story, who gets to shape it, and what is our responsibility as both protagonists in the story, but also people who have a role in telling it, in both shaping that story and changing it. So now, if I'm talking to people who are like, just starting to think about this, my instinct is to kind of encourage them to pull away from the traditional narrative or the headlines, if you will, which obviously showcase Pakistan as a place of violence, as a place increasingly and unfortunately of climate devastation. We talk about aid packages and security briefings, the things that kind of dominate how people imagine Pakistan, especially in many, many parts of the world. And I encourage that not because these things are not real, they're very real, but because they tell you almost nothing about the reality of how Pakistanis encounter each other every day or how we experience the world. And so, like you said, I've been working almost for 2 decades across culture, across social change and enterprise. And a lot of my work brings me into contact with regular, ordinary people whose lives we speak about rather than are spoken about by them. So this includes like women artisans, community makers, entrepreneurs, activists. And again, I think I encounter that huge gap between the story that gets told about people and the lived complexity of who they actually are. So, a woman can be incredibly poor, but still incredibly powerful in her knowledge. She can be absolutely constrained in some areas of her life and be incredibly entrepreneurial or display incredible leadership in others. Community can be vulnerable to climate change, but also hold the most sophisticated knowledge about how to survive it or about resilience in this case. I think, particular to my work, what fascinates me is how traditional craft can be both ancient, so going back as much as 7,000 years in its history, but still be so innovative and relevant to use and adaptation today. So, what I'm trying to say is that for me, this complexity is at the heart of what I'm excited by, and this asymmetry that we see in the story that is told and the story that is or it could be really matters. working specifically, I think, on these issues in Pakistan also makes me kind of very aware of the power dynamics around this knowledge as well. I think I get to experience sort of both sides of the story. I get to be in rooms where policies are made, where conversations are had, where academic papers are written, where the people where are being discussed. And then on another day in the same week, maybe I get to walk right back into those communities that were being discussed and participate in a very different way, get to live with them, get to experience life with them. And those are very, very distinct perspectives. And I've been very interested in bridging the spaces between them. So whether I do that through my art, work, showcasing the work of Paulina the Stories, like looking at artisan craft in Pakistan, or trying to create platforms for women through the Women of the World Festival, whether I'm teaching or sort of writing about sustainability, I think I keep coming back to purpose as sort of the central theme and visibility, both for people and the forms of knowledge that are very much embedded in our culture but are so often overlooked. And in this conversation, what I try and do is make sure that visibility isn't just about being seen and heard, it's actually about being recognized as something that has value, as something which has authority, and also looking at the rights of participation in shaping the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this. You mentioned one project that you've been working on that I want to ask about and have you share with our audience a bit more about
Yeah.
the social enterprise that you work with and help found Polly and Other Stories, which is a platform that connects hundreds of talented artists across the country with consumers who may not otherwise encounter them to bridge social and cultural gaps with these groups. I was wondering if you could share a bit more about what sparked your interest in creating this platform. What was it like
Yeah.
bringing it to fruition, and what were some of the obstacles you encountered? How did you overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, Holly's a love story for me. It began from a very simple frustration. I'd been working in what's called the NGO sector or the sort of social impact space in Pakistan for many years. So I'd spent a lot of time with very talented communities, particularly with the women in those communities. I'd gotten to know them really well, gotten to know their skills really well. But I had a really sort of basic frustration. This is about 11 years ago. I could see that extraordinary things were being made across Pakistan, as I said, often by incredibly skilled women who were completely restricted from accessing a market for their products because of limitations in mobility and education and even understanding about how market worked, or sometimes just having no idea about the value of what they were making. So the enormous distance between this very talented person who is creating this, I guess, like a like a lived embodiment of our heritage, and the person who would deeply value it was enormous. And I just wanted to build a bridge because I couldn't understand why there is a demand for these products, which are incredibly beautiful, like I said, and there are people making these products, but they simply can't find each other. And what I've discovered in the process is that, when you start, you often start with a bit of hubris and you assume that relationships are going to be linear, that it's like, oh, it's just about connecting people to the market. And, at that time, the e-commerce revolution in Pakistan was just beginning to take off. I mean, it's now come a very long way, especially post-COVID. But at that time, this idea that people would shop online, that we could use social media to promote products was still very new. And I think, you know, I was very convinced that if I could take somebody's incredibly beautiful heritage craft and tell a story around it, kind of make it cool and fashionable to value what is local, what is so indigenous to this land, and make the maker visible, ensure that they're well paid, they're recognized. I thought that would be enough, just get them livelihoods and have that opportunity for them to showcase their work to the world. What I've learned since then is that even when you do this, you haven't necessarily changed the power structures that create these inequalities in the first place. So I think for me, increasingly, it is not just about, and I don't underrate the value of livelihoods in these communities or about the importance of preserving the craft, but it's also about changing the story around the artisan and the makers themselves. Not every poor woman who is a maker in a rural village in Pakistan is waiting for our help. We need to kind of look at what we miss out when we do not interact with these women. because they're makers, they're designers, they're innovators, they're knowledge holders, they're entrepreneurs. So they have something of value to contribute to sort of mainstream markets or society. And this, I think, is where the work has been of both joy and a challenge, because when you're running a social enterprise in Pakistan, especially because we don't have a B Corp structure or anything like that. So you're kind of forced to go the private limited way, but it requires you to constantly negotiate between purpose and a commercial reality that does not really recognize you as a social enterprise. So you need a business that works, but you also have to constantly ask about where is power sitting in the value chain, who's really benefiting, whose voice is being represented. And I think one of the biggest gifts for me is how much it has changed my own sort of understanding and thinking about poverty, which is quite something to say given I spent my entire career working around solutions for that. I think I see obviously poverty is a lack of access to resources, a lack of access to incomes, and I'm not underrating that. But I think increasingly for me, poverty is a lack of access to power over market, over resources, over intellectual property, and over your own stories. And I think as sort of the enterprise grows, that is the area that I'm really interested in looking at. Like, what does this mean to be sitting on this kind of, I will use the word insane level of talent, and then not be able to showcase it to the world and not have it be one of the first three things that people think of when they think of Pakistan. So that's kind of like right now, that's like what gets me excited, so to speak.
Yeah, what I've really kind of appreciated about this explanation is that the creation of the site allowed you to rethink power and like who has the power not just to sell products and make a quick buck,
Yeah.
but to like tell stories, to represent culture, quote unquote, or heritage, quote unquote,
Yeah.
and to think through these things. I think one maybe question and thing that I was thinking about is like, is there a certain product or service or item that on the site that like has really kind of encapsulated this and like would allow our listeners to really think about like this how the creation of this site really allowed you to rethink the axis of power.
I think one of my favorite products, and it's a very, I mean, it's a popular Pakistani product. It's one that we all grew up seeing. It's in our homes, but it's one that's so deeply underrated is the Rilli, which is the quilt, which is used, made like the running stitch, kantha, and it's kind of across cultures. And what fascinates me about that particular piece is one, it's everywhere, so it's ubiquitous. Like it's not, and it's across cultures as well. Of course, we have our own very distinct imprint on it. So, I mean, a Pakistani quilt, you can see it and instantly you'll know. But it's the level of detail, the work, the stories, the motives, how you can identify which community has made it just based on the number of stitches that go into it. Like there's a whole language, there's a design language there. And it is how women communicated with each other. It's also how they found community. But what fascinates me about this when we're talking about power is that all of these women were artists well within their rights. And I think just generally within the art world, textile art has been late to be recognized because it was primarily women's art. So perhaps no surprise. But even within that, this quilt was made anonymously by thousands of women in community. So for me, this quilting has led to this entire line of inquiry around leadership and how the model of leadership, when it comes to making something which is a communal product for which you are never given visibility and voice as an artist. So it is also an anonymous like maker. At the end of the day, it could be 20 women. You don't know if it's one woman who made the quilt. Is it 20 women who made the quilt? How long did they take? What was going on in their lives? All of it is in the quilt if you know how to read it, which I'm slowly learning over time. And it's been such a gratifying journey. So when I think of the the Rilli in particular, and it's so dismissed, it's so easily dismissed because we think of it as what? Redundant, Dakyanusi, everybody's seen it, it's not exciting. What's so special about this quilt? And then when you kind of begin to literally unravel the threads or unwrap the layers, you're just amazed by what this one piece of textile has. It has the soul of an entire community. And I think it also links very importantly to conversations today, which are so important when you look at production and making around sustainability and repair. Because the quilt literally exemplifies that by its very existence. So the same quilt is used in winter differently by layering it up. Then you separate it for the summer by taking out the layers. Then it becomes a quote. Like it has so many lives. There's this beautiful display at a textile museum in Karachi, which and anybody who's coming, they should absolutely go see. And I love how you can see that same garment. There are marks on how many ways it has been used in its life. And some of these pieces go back 200, 250 years, and they're still remarkably stunning. And I think the thing that really bothers me is that when you go to a museum like, say, the V&A in London, and then you see the identical quilts. So these quilts are being made like right now in Pakistan, undervalued, including by Pakistani consumers, like right now. I'm not saying just by diaspora, but like by all of us. And yet when we see them in a museum, you're just like, that's exactly and the same level of skill. So it's just disappointing, I think, for me. I think that's what's the bit that really gets my goat, so to speak, because I'm just like, what did we do wrong here, right? Like we're clearly doing couture level craft,
Hmm.
and yet it is so under-recognized both within our own cultures and communities. And then, of course, when we don't own our own story and we take no pride in it, then it's perhaps no surprise that internationally, of course, we're completely invisible.
Absolutely. And what I really appreciated about this answer is you using the quilt not just as a metaphor to think through the different threads and colors and fabrics and textiles that are on the quilt itself, but as a sort of metaphor for resilience, for diversity, for
Yeah,
opportunity, for longevity, right? Like the quilt is older than the nation of Pakistan. It stretches back into sort of colonial
yeah,
period. It's kind of global in its reaches. You mentioned the Victoria and Albert Museum and like the kind of
yeah,
similarities that exist at different points of sort of the metropole in Britain and the
yeah,
colony in
yeah,
colonial India or Pakistan. And
yeah.
so I think this is a really kind of fascinating metaphor to like sit through and unpack literally and symbolically.
I'm quite quilt obsessed. So when people, I mean, somebody once asked me, what was the first product that you thought of when you thought of a poly? And to be honest, it's been really since day one. So really till I die. But like, I love it. I think it could make a great political slogan. It's such a beautiful piece of fabric. And I don't think I mean, there's a couple of books that have been written about this craft now, and I'm really happy to see people showing more interest, but so much more to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's really, really wonderful. I
Yeah.
think this links on to one of my next questions, which is the kind of work you've done across Pakistan, and you've traveled to so many different parts of Pakistan, from kind of the
Mhm.
most densely populated parts of Karachi, where you're based, to the
Yeah.
glaciers of Gilgit-Baltistan in the north of Pakistan. And so I'm wondering, what has your travel and work across the country taught you about the extraordinary diversity of the country, and where is still on your list of places to visit in Pakistan?
Ooh, that's a hard one. So I think, it's really there isn't one Pakistan. So quite often when people, if you're traveling abroad or you're somewhere and you're talking about the country, I always find that a little complicated. Like, it is complicated to say that, okay, well, I'm Amne, I'm brown, I'm Muslim, I'm Pakistani, and this is what that looks like, right? Because that is certainly one version of it. But there are so many versions of what Pakistan looks like and what Pakistani women or Pakistani artisans can look like. And I think that's the problem. The story, like you said, has been so badly flattened. And we want such a singular, linear, kind of boring narrative about what it is. Just answer it quickly. That's that. I think this is partly fueled by this urgency that the VC culture creates, right? Like, which is like, if you don't have a 30-second elevator pitch, that means you have nothing important to say. Only really boring things fit into 30-second elevator pitches. I hate them. But I just think that's the same thing that's happened with Pakistan, right? So part of, I think, what's been really exciting about my ability to travel across the country, which is that so much knowledge, beauty, innovation exists outside the places that we traditionally recognize as the centers of knowledge or as the centers of creation. You will meet people in communities that we would use the word marginalized to describe, and then discover that they're the ones who have expert knowledge about, say, materials or agriculture or climate or even about trade and making. So I think all of this exposure has made me so much more interested in listening rather than being quick to label or define. It's also made me question these ideas about how we often, position these communities or makers or creatives within these communities or even activists within these communities as people waiting for solutions that will come from somewhere outside. Now, this doesn't have to be internationally, although there's a lot of imported solutions in the country, but it could even be big city to small, it's coming from outside. And yet these people have survived for generations without this external intervention. And it's just that we don't recognize their knowledge as innovation. And I think in terms of where to go, gosh, I know Gilgit-Baltistan is on everybody's list. I've been lucky enough to have been going there since I was 14 years old. And some of it is terrifying what this new wave of tourism has done to the place, to the people, to the remarkable natural beauty. And it's still spectacularly stunning. Absolutely encourage people to go. But there's so many. I mean, one of the things that I think people underrate as part of our culture is go on a shrine tour. There is such an incredible culture in this country, and I think we are losing it. We're also losing it to the wrong forces, perhaps, if I may say so. And it's just stunning. And it's not just the shrine itself, it's the culture of food, song, language, um, the material histories, how the motifs, there's just so much. Like you could spend, any one would be interesting. But also, I think the other thing people miss and quite often forget is how much incredible wildlife we have in this country. Again, because perhaps it is, and this is perhaps what saved it, because it has not been regulated and commodified. So much of Pakistan is completely untouched because we haven't quite commodified it. So while this is a bad thing, and people will always position it as, we haven't invested, we haven't done this, we haven't done that. And I'm just like, actually, because we haven't done all of that, we've actually left it well alone. So when you want to experience Pakistan, there's two questions you have to ask yourself. Which Pakistan? Am I interested in looking at a medieval Pakistan? Do I want to see how people lived 5,000 years ago? The sad truth is you can see it now. So
Yeah.
the bullock cart from Mohenjo-daro,
Yep.
which is such a famous, iconic like image, you can see the identical bullock cart. No difference, still being used in rural Sindh for the same purpose that it was used 5,000 years ago. Because in some ways, you have, I mean, as I said, there's no one narrative. It's such a fascinating country that we are, because you'll talk about, the youth bulge, because we like to refer to our young people as something terrible and unflattering, hence the bulge. But, you know, despite the youth bulge, despite the use of cellular technology, so much has remained unchanged and untouched. So decide which Pakistan do you want to see. Do you want to pretend you're in New York? Sure, you can do that. You can go be in a Pakistan that looks and sounds and feels very much like it. Or like we recently had some relatives visiting and we'd gone out for coffee, and one of the first things he said was, "Oh my gosh, this is Karachi. Are we in LA?" And I was like, because of the aesthetic of the shop and the kind of drinks that people were having. And he was
Yeah.
just like, "What is this?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, so it depends on which Pakistan you want to have. The wonderful thing is you can have them all in one
Yeah.
trip."
Absolutely. I mean, you see this kind of multiplicity of different lives, experiences, stories, not just in the big power centers of the country, of the big cities,
Yeah,
Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad.
yeah,
But I really appreciate your urge to kind of move folks away, like to think through those, absolutely, and the many diversities that exist within these three big cities and different regions of Pakistan that are seen
yeah,
as
of
very
course.
powerful, like Punjab and Sindh, but to think through the whole of the country, right? The many different macro problems that are affecting it, whether it's poverty, whether it's rapid climate
Yeah,
change, whether it's the youth bulge, whether it's gender-based violence, whether it's lots of different things, and to see the intricacies at their own level with the respect and authority and knowledge-making power that they really deserve,
yeah.
as opposed to like importing your own views and placing it on them to allow space for that nuance that exists and that so many people, and frankly, a lot of sort of urban elite Pakistanis kind of uh,
100%. Yeah, we're part of the problem. I mean, I'm not, this is not a diaspora thing. It's definitely within the country as well. And I think it's important to kind of name it. Just having a modicum of patience and I guess curiosity also, right? Like be open to a different perspective, be open to
right.
this idea that there isn't one way for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I wanted to ask about is how the rapid effects of climate change have kind of affected your work on sustainability and your thinking. And so, maybe to add some context, as many of our listeners know, Pakistan faces some of the most intense aspects of climate change so acutely. So
Yeah,
there have been massive floods in recent years, affected
yeah,
that have been some of the deadliest in modern history and have affected large parts of the country, from Sindh to
mm,
Punjab and
mm,
everywhere in between. Rapid desertification and melting glaciers. We were talking about Gilgit-Baltistan and the kind of
yeah,
the tourist waves and heat waves that have been affecting it and have been a huge drain on the
yeah,
resources and power centers. power making capacities there, as well as record-breaking heat, as anybody knows who visits not
Hmm.
just in the summer, but like earlier and earlier and later in the year.
Yeah.
These massive record-breaking heat waves that affect the country and tax the power grids. And so, given your work on climate and sustainability, I'm wondering if you could share a bit more on how some of these aspects factor into your work and thinking.
I mean, in some ways, a lot of the communities I work with are quite literally on the front line, right? Like you talked about I mean, when we look growing up, and I think still people have this idea, Pakistan is an agrarian economy. We're not really anymore. We're more of a trading economy. And I think that's sobering when you just sit with that for 2 seconds and think about the fact that 250 million people need to be fed. And yet we're not an agrarian economy anymore, but we have all this land, and yet it's being developed in ways that may not serve us well in the future, is the gentlest way I can put it. So arable land is being converted for other uses, and I think it's a little bit scary because and then you kind of like add on top the layer of what the climate apocalypse is doing. There's no other way for it, no other language for it. And you're seeing it right now, right? So we're kind of at the end of summer technically, although it's hideously and like you pointed out, Danielle, like horrifically hot in parts of the country that have never experienced such heat. We've got the glacier melt, and we've all seen the horrific images coming out of the north of the country as like just last week. So it's not as bad as it was in 2022, thankfully, but it's not like these communities are not suffering. Um, and when it comes to sort of, when you think about basically environmental sustainability, to me this is very connected to the work I do on economic and social justice. So anytime you're working with a community that is connected to land and water and agriculture or any kind of natural materials or ecosystems, then climate isn't a distant issue for them. It's actually immediately affecting both their ability to work, earn, and live. um, but I think one of the things that's happening is that any conversations about solutions are absolutely not including these communities. I was talking earlier about the Really, but which is a fantastic emblem for repair and reuse, how to make things last, how to work with natural materials. Also looking at seasonality because the different dyes that were used in Release are indicative of what seasons they were made in. And none of these ideas are new. They're absolutely like embodied in how so many communities live today. These communities understand these sort of instinctively in a way that our modern consumer economy is not being able to. So I think one of the issues is that we need to kind of like look at this conversation about climate vulnerability as, again, we're still seeing it as, oh, now we need to have aid and somebody needs to come save us and there's this technology that needs to be given. And while I'm not taking away from that, yeah, please give us the aid, we need it. Make sure it's used where it's meant to be as well. But at the end of the day, I think it's done at the cost of the people who are immediately affected not being part of the dialogue. And that's the bits that's a little bit terrifying, because if those solutions don't come, and they're not at the moment coming from abroad at any kind of required pace, then do we just sit around and wait? Like, at what point do we start listening to people who are actively combating and surviving the waves of climate apocalypse, right? So is that not resilience? Like, how do we define resilience? So I think those are the things that I'm really interested in. And like I said, the economic future of these communities, many of them make from materials that come from the land because that's how they've always done it. And once the land is impacted, the water is impacted. Like we were talking earlier about natural dyes,
Hmm.
it is based on, well, the water of the Indus,
Yeah,
right? If the Indus itself is behaving in ways that it has not behaved traditionally, then how can the community that rely on it for fish or for like agriculture or for like creation of any kind, how are
right.
they then create? So they're all falling out of these economies really, really fast and moving to, I'm not really sure what else, because it's not like our industry is doing dramatically well either, even if I put the critique of it aside.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, and as I am thinking about this, how can I say this? Pakistan has experienced for many, many years, what the rest of the world is experiencing now, right? You see
Yes.
lots of record-breaking heat waves in North America and Western
Yeah.
Europe. And Pakistan has been experiencing this for many, many years. There's only so
Yes.
much adaptation and resilience and mitigation that folks can really do before there
Mhm.
is,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, widespread famine, mass slaughter. and
Yes.
people really succumbing to the worst effects of climate change, whether it's monsoon flooding, record-breaking heat, glaciers melting. And so,
And we saw the horrific loss of life and livestock and livelihoods and land in
absolutely,
2022.
absolutely.
And I know it fell out of sort of, it was exciting for a while for everybody to cover it, and then it fell off.
Yeah,
But the impacts are still being lived today. There are still parts of the country which have not recovered at all in
yeah,
any way. Not the
absolutely.
land, not the people, not the livelihoods. So when you think of that, like 4 years on, you realize that this is just still very real for them. And people manage, I guess, if you're alive, that's is that what it's supposed to be then? Is there no hope for anything better?
Right.
It's a very important policy question, of course.
Absolutely. And sadly, it's become business as usual, but I think to ignore the effects of it or to look away. But hopefully it is not any longer.
I hope
Um,
not. Yeah.
One other question I wanted to ask was about your work in the kind of festival culture in Pakistan
Mm,
and thinking about women of the world. And so, for folks
yeah.
who visit Pakistan on a regular basis at different parts of the year, they'll come to notice a sort of vibrancy around different festivals, whether they're literature festivals, think fests,
Yes.
other sorts of small and large gatherings where people can come and discuss different
Mm,
policy ideas, different pieces of literature, different small and large scale projects, cultural preservation projects,
mm,
books, political issues, you name it. And so one of those that's really been wonderful, and that's something that I personally enjoyed quite a bit, is the Women of the World Festival in Pakistan, which has been around for 10 years or so,
yes,
and
just
has
aware.
celebrated the extraordinary achievements of Pakistani women from all walks of life and provided them a dedicated platform on the festival stages of the country. I'm wondering if you could say a bit more on what it was like to build this forum and how has it changed over those 10 years?
So WOW is part of a global network of festivals, and this is the largest women's festival in the world. It's happened in 70 places across the world. So it's quite a large global network. Um, Pakistan was the very first country in South Asia to sort of like bring a feminist festival to Karachi. It was back in 2016, and I think just that language, right? I think it's amazing because you talked a little bit about gender violence earlier. Pakistan unfortunately ranks on the wrong side of the ranking, and I think we're like the lowest in the world when it comes to 156th out of 156 countries when it comes to gender equality, unfortunately. So in a country like that, I think it becomes more radical and more political and perhaps more important. But the festival itself is sort of couched in the language of arts and culture. So there's a lot of joy. It brings joy as resistance at the center of it. So there's a lot of celebration, which is why the language of festival versus conference or symposium. So we do have elements of that. Of course, there's talks and workshops, but there's a lot of space to sort of just celebrate, come together, a lot of community, a lot of joy, a lot of music, a lot of color, a lot of culture. And I think for me, sort of we celebrated being in Pakistan for 10 years in January. And I mean, there's something extremely powerful about being able to put a spectrum of women and girls on a public stage and tell them in the most meaningful way that your experience matters, your voice matters, your expertise matters, and that you belong in this conversation. Obviously, we've gotten much more ambitious over the years, like kind of moving beyond just representation to more deeper questions about come back to power again, about intersectionality, about economics, about safety, about agency, and what all of that means in a local context. So even though WOW is an international festival, we do contextualize all of the conversations very locally. And I think that's kind of been part of the evolution of the festival itself. So it's not just about giving people visibility and voice, it's also about beginning to question why these people needed support to get that visibility and voice in the same place. So not just about celebration, but about who gets to participate and why. And I think, it's exciting for me because Pakistani women in particular are often reduced to very simplistic narratives by international audiences. They're either, I mean, you're given two choices, right? You get to be a victim or you get to be a symbol of progress. And we both know that these two these two figures are very visually different. There's a particular visual narrative for one, and then for the other. And I think the ability to kind of challenge that at so many levels is probably one of the most exciting things about doing well for me. I think the festival is something that I'm not sure what I have given to, but I have definitely taken away so much, including a profoundly meaningful community of women across the country, from fisherfolk to senators, who
Right.
have been a part of the festival and have brought it to life. So I think that's just one of the most rewarding parts of doing something like this. Yeah.
And I think this continues so well on our theme of many stories, one Pakistan,
Yeah.
in thinking through the breadth and diversity of so many different cultures, subgroups, communities, genders, gender identities,
Mm,
etc. In
mm.
this. And I think one other question I had on this was to think through generationality and how that's influenced your thinking on women of the world, right? So we've mentioned so many different topics affecting younger Pakistanis, the sort of youth bulge
Yeah.
that exists and I think in even in your answer, you were thinking mentioning the kind of impact that it has on the youngest girls who are seeing kind of
Yeah.
issues and questions of representation, of violence, of power being discussed openly.
Yeah.
And the fact that there are many sort of older feminist movements that have existed in Pakistan of
Yeah, of
people who have
course, absolutely.
survived, the gender-based violence that existed in the 1970s and 80s during the reign of General Zia, of people who protested openly, of people who took to the streets and marched and protested and thought about this. And so I'm wondering if you could say a bit more about the generationality that exists among different um, women's groups, communities, and especially as they relate to women of the world.
I mean, I think that's always a complicated question in a country like Pakistan, right? Again, like what 65% people are young, but where does power lie? It lies with older people. It's not any less complicated within the feminist space, and why should it be, right? Um, and I think that's what makes it really interesting. So we have to kind of, when we're designing, we look at that space as a way for people from different from across sort of the bridge who wouldn't sit together. It becomes a place where people can come together and have those very difficult conversations about what does it mean to respect what women did before, even if the conversation is changing now, even if the narrative is changing now, even if the needs are changing, even if the language is changing, even if what we define as feminist today is not what would have been defined as feminist 30 years ago. And I think, it's been such a joy to kind of look at how people from different sides of the table will come together and want to create something meaningful, want to create something beautiful. I think what people are beginning to recognize in Pakistan, and not just in the feminist space, across different spaces, is the need for community, is the need to come together, is the need to build together, is to repair together, is to heal together. And I think those forces cannot be underrated. In some ways, circumstances do not allow you, I feel, to be too caught up in the semantics of things. And if we spend all of our time sort of like getting into the nitty gritty and but we disagree on this one micro, we can keep doing that, but that won't take us very far. And I think most people see that and they want to come and like build together. When it comes to sort of younger people in Pakistan, I think, like I said, I've always hated using the word, like it's used in all these policy documents like bulge. I hate it because it tells you a bulge is something undesirable. So I'm just like, why are you calling 65% of your country a bulge? It's not a bulge. It's a massive resource. It's an asset. It's an exciting space. And I know there's a lot of global conversation about how Gen Z is so disconnected. And I think one of the particular problems in Pakistan that often comes up is a lack of hope because they can't imagine a better future. And when they can't imagine a better future, the best thing they can imagine is leaving the country. The best thing that can happen to you is if you leave. So
Right.
when you're sort of in that environment, then, I think conversations like this and feeling like you have some way to contribute, that change is possible, and that you don't have to start by changing the entire country or making up the entire world. Sometimes just learning a disappearing skill can be something meaningful. Sometimes just participating in a space where voices that are not traditionally heard can be particularly sort of meaningful. Sometimes just voting with your money, can be so meaningful and so special. Sometimes just coming together, and like I said, the festival space offers you a space for just being happy. It's, a lot of these projects are often evaluated. So you have monitoring and evaluation come in. And it's so fun to work with these traditional firms who are like, so what is the impact? And you're like, people were happy. That was the impact, and I don't think we see joy enough. I mean, of course, we evaluate across many, many other things, including, shifting norms and other like perceptions. But I think we underrate what a powerful tool for resistance joy is. And I don't mean resistance in any giant revolutionary sense. I mean resistance in its most basic. Do we have access to hope? Can we dream of
Yeah.
a better future? That is also, I think, a kind of resistance against despair in sort of the world we live in today.
Yeah. No, and I think I really appreciate you highlighting the kind of Gen Z aspect of this, that on the one
Yeah.
hand, there is a sort of deep-seated pessimism, kind of lack of hope, a sort of fatalist view, and it's especially pronounced in Pakistan, given the kind of
Yeah.
massive macroeconomic trends, this
Yes.
kind of desire of people to like leave and get out and feeling like
Yes.
sort of exile and leaving will solve their problems. But on the other hand, the sort of hope that your work, that these spaces provide, and that it gives a kind of it allows them to sketch out an alternative vision for what belonging means, what participating in a community means, what raising your voice means, what sort of creating, cultivating a particular aesthetic,
Mm.
culture, heritage, these sorts of things mean. And so, I guess to that end, thinking about this, you've served as a lecturer, as a teacher in so many different capacities, whether it's in the Indus Valley School of Art in Karachi and other places, and thinking about art and design and architecture. I'm wondering, specifically in working with young people, whether it's millennials or Gen Z, what have those experiences kind of taught you about what their minds are thinking about and how their approach to sort of politics, culture, society, ethics, those sorts of things are? I'm wondering if you can share a bit more about those, because those are such contested terms
Yeah.
and contested
Yeah.
kind of generations, and thinking about how they approach things are.
I mean, I love working with young people. I think they're so exciting. I sometimes find that they're unfairly labeled and quite easily dismissed. Um, I wish I had the same kind of political awareness at 18 and 19 that I now see with younger people. And I'm impressed. I'm amazed by how much they know, at how thoughtful they are, at how mindful they are. Um, is it easy, I suppose, growing up in the world as the way it is? Probably not. I think, in some ways, as an elder millennial, I say that we were the last people to have some kind of shield because we still read books in libraries, right? We were the last generation to do that. We didn't have this onslaught of information 24/7, and then to fight it and to recognize that there's a possibility that you can create, curate beyond this. I find them incredibly smart as well, right? So they just have more information than any generation has ever had before, perhaps unfairly so. The world is absolutely a gloomy place if you allow it, if you focus too hard on that. So they learn to be so creative. And I think, when you were talking about festivals like WOW giving them a space, I also have to really, I think, mention how many times they create their own spaces. There's so many beautiful spaces across KLI, but also in smaller cities. I was recently in Jamshoro, and that's a small town in interior Sindh, beautiful city. And these young people left me amazed. They had these incredible small places where young people gather. They make music, they're interested in art and craft. I mean, we were talking about the impact of heat. There was this beautiful photo essay done by this young artist on the impact of living in small apartments in a large city and the impact of heat and not being able to afford air conditioning and what that does to your psychological state. And it was so deep and so meaningful. And it's not exactly what you think you're going to find when you walk into a university. And maybe people aren't imagining that young people in Jamshoro are thinking about these things, but they are. They're not just thinking about them, they're investigating them, they're interrogating them. And I think they're beginning to understand slowly that maybe they can change them, which I think is going to be such a powerful moment when they finally claim that for themselves, that space for themselves. It's going to be, yeah, I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I think even hearing you kind of describe this, I feel rejuvenated, and I feel sort of animated by a spirit of hope, and thinking about I am a young person and a millennial, but thinking through how Gen Z are approaching things that are even more
Yeah.
dystopian than the things that I encountered were, and their creativity, resilience, flexibility, kind of their innovation amidst the kind of bleakness of these spaces.
Oh, and one more thing I should say. They
Yeah,
kind of pushback against rules and norms that perhaps we just accepted to some
Yeah,
degree.
yeah,
Things like, I love how they'll walk out at 5 p.m. and saying, sorry, I now need to go to the beach because that's the commitment I made to my friends and that's what I'll be doing now. So guess what? You don't get me until 9 a.m. And I feel like, that's how our parents' generation used to work as well. They kind of left office and then nobody could stop them. And then there was this massive period in the middle where we allowed work or corporations to take over our lives. And these guys are
right.
pushing back and they're seen as lazy as a result. But really, I think it's incredibly intelligent. And they're so mindful about how they use technology as well. It's amazing because yes, while they're using a lot of tools which really, really fast and adapting and adopting them, they're also very critical of them and they're very aware of their own sort of rights and they think very deeply about these things. I think a lot of people underrate them. I don't. I love working with them.
No, absolutely. And kind of to add on to this, I think there is a particular, you reference this, but a particular kind of awareness to challenge norms and also political questions, really thorny
Yeah.
political questions, right? Of like
Yes.
gender-based violence, of sexual assault, of questions of
Yeah.
Pakistan's role in the world, of Palestine, questions of genocide, of
Yes.
all these sorts of things that there's a particularly sharp and acute lens on and focus
Mhm.
on, and a lot of clarity that exists amidst the kind
Yes.
of bleakness of these systems and how they failed us, they failed them, so particularly uh, hard. Um,
Yeah, I mean, there's anger and despair as well, and I shouldn't underrate that. But I,
yeah,
I, I I understand it. I empathize, right? We're all feeling it. So why should they be any different? Why shouldn't they
right,
feel it? Yeah, but
right,
I
right.
think they're not going to be quite as sunk by it as people fear.
Good, and I'm so glad to hear it. I guess finally on our last question, what's one book,
Yes.
thinking about reading and critical exposure, what's one book you would recommend to our audience that has really shaped your thinking and why?
Oh gosh, I don't know if I can really do that. I was a voracious reader growing up, which serves me well today as well. So I remember I went to a convent school, which isn't unusual, I suppose, when you're growing up in a big city in Pakistan. And I remember that the headmistress had to call my mom in and said she borrows a book a day. Does she actually read them? And I would finish one or two books every single day. So I was quite a nerd. So I find it hard to find that one book. But what I did want to mention is this fantastic book that I read recently. I'm kind of obsessed with it. I'm on my second reading of it right now. It's called Being a Beast by Charles Foster. It is one of the most wonderfully strange books I have ever read because this gentleman tries to experience the world by living the lives of different animals. And so he lives as a badger, he lives as a fox, right? And what I found incredibly amazing about this, because I mean, for me, it really kind of why it, I think, really tickled my imagination is because the big question that he's asking is, what if our way of seeing the world is not the only or the right way of seeing the world, right? And because I've spent a lot of time recently thinking about that in my work, about how we become so accustomed to deciding what is right, what is wrong, what is innovation, what is knowledge, what is progress, and those definitions, especially like in many countries in the world are increasingly from very particular Western institutions or worldviews. And I think I found that that book kind of like directs you almost towards the answer because it says you need humility in thinking about what you think you know. And sometimes you need to, if you can understand a world of animals, which is a world where there isn't any language, then you have to be curious enough to learn about that language. And I think for me, that was such an incredibly, like I said, I'm on my second reading of it. I'm obsessed with this book and I tell everybody about it so that you get to be told as well right now. But growing up, I read a lot of Margaret Atwood. I will say this, I absolutely adored her. I don't think there's any book that I hadn't read. And at one point in my life, The Handmaid's Tale really impacted me quite deeply. Might have had something to do with where I ended up eventually as well. But yeah,
Well, thank you so
recommend both
much.
if people haven't read them.
Yeah, no, these are all great suggestions. Thank you very, very much for the suggestions, for the wide-ranging conversation, for so many insights that you shared with me and with our audience. I really, really appreciated the conversation. Thank you again, Amne. It was lovely
Oh,
chatting with
thank
you.
you so much, Danielle, and thank you. I hope that, we stay connected. Thank you very
Of
much.
course. Take care.